Sir, my name is Rajratan and I am from JNU MA Ancient History first year. Sir, my question is, does the nationalism or it should be termed as a ultra-nationalism, does it expose or fertilize to our adversaries which they exploit? Or what should be the way forward for a nation like us, whether it should be the nationalism or patriotism? Because we have a very good example of our one neighbor, that what can jingoism do with a nation. We have a very good example in our neighbor. So what should be the way forward for us?
Do me a favor, and perhaps for the benefit of the audience, can you perhaps distinguish between nationalism and patriotism?
Nationalism is I am the best.
Please don't give me Dr. Tharu's definition. I don't agree with him.
No, sir.
He basically said a patriot is someone who can die for the country, and a nationalist is someone who can kill for the country. Then what do you make of the soldiers, man? What argument is that? Forget it. Give me a better
nationalism
argument.
is like I am the best and
Right.
nobody can beat my level.
Right.
Like everybody is lower than my level.
Right.
And patriotism is I have some level and anyone can achieve that level. That is the patriotism.
Okay, fine. What do you think of Indian nationalism? Does it have a religious bias to it or not?
Sir,
What is your
currently
notion
it
of it?
seems like some events in recent past that it seems like it does have a religious biasness.
Okay.
Few events like which exposes our fault lines to the adversaries that they exploit
Okay.
at global level also.
Okay. Around the 1900s, when the talk of nationalism started, was it irreligious nationalism according to you?
No, it was a religious nationalism.
How? Spell it out. Which religions are we talking about?
Like Christianity.
Around the 1900s in this country, there were two parallel streams of nationalism. One was Hindu clearly, and the other was Muslim clearly. Okay? Now we are being told that either you give up the concept of nationalism altogether and restrict yourself to patriotism, or you subscribe to civic nationalism as opposed to religious nationalism. These are the two arguments. And when we ask what is the meaning of civic nationalism, we are being told you subscribe to the constitution, and that would amount to civic nationalism. Okay? Which is to say, if you pledge allegiance to this document, you're a nationalist. And that is the civic nationalism that Dr. Tharu effectively pushes on a regular basis. Now, in the context of Bharat, I don't think it's possible to subscribe to an irreligious form of nationalism, given that religion continues to feature heavily in our political discussions, and it is not a new divide, it's a pre-existing divide that dates back to at least 700 to 800 years at the very least, and which has seen vivisection of the country and continued balkanization of certain parts of the country, which Article 370 was meant to stem to some extent. Or rather, the amendment to Article 370 was meant to stem to some extent. I am unable to subscribe to the view that given the current state of affairs, it's possible to subscribe to a liberal form of nationalism. Because as someone who speaks of dharmic civilizationism, there is a very clear resistive component in my attitude. Not a reactionary or a reactive component, but a resistive component. Which is to say that the continued attempt to pixelate my identity as a Hindu through balkanization of their identity in the form of language, in the form of caste, or in the form of racial studies, is something that I wish to resist. And therefore, as someone who understands the Eurocentric origins of nationalism, I will reject the imposition of European-style nationalism on this country, but I will certainly subscribe to a very clear resistive civilizationalism in the interest of my Sanskriti. And that is something that I will certainly stand for. And there is a reason for it. European nationalism has a supremacist component. It also has a serious anthropocentric component where race features heavily, complexion features heavily, and the projection of European style nationalism onto the struggles of the let's say, of this society, which has seen two waves of colonization, is to impose white guilt onto non-whites. And that is something that I think is historically inaccurate and, dare I say, positively dumb. So that's one of the reasons that I refuse to buy the imported labels of left and right, because both of them have their own European origins. And therefore, perhaps I'm asking for some semblance of originality in crafting your position based on indigenous ethos as opposed to Western ethos. So to answer your question, recraft nationalism to civilizationism predominantly, be conscious of the history of the last at least 150 years and the last 75 years, and remember that partition is not an act of the past or in the past. It seems to be an ongoing activity at several levels by two different set of state and non-state actors. So whether it gives others to divide, let's say a handle to divide us, it means that in the absence of the outsider we are otherwise united, which I think is a major presumption. We are not otherwise united. What am I basically saying? When someone says the partition is the product of the divide and rule policy of the British man, oh, that evil British man, of course he was evil, but he was exploiting a pre-existing divide, he was not creating a divide. That is the distinction between the position of a certain cross-section of people and my position. Literature tells me that the divide was real, the divide was very vicious, and the divide continued to show in the form of multiple riots almost on an annual basis on the same set of issues. And this recurring wound clearly seems to be the remnant of a continuing schism or battle. In light of that, people previously have struggled to come out with some kind of a neutral identity and they've failed. That neutral identity led to the bloody partition of the sacred geography called Bharat, with massive loss of lives. If that experiment has not succeeded, assuming it were to be undertaken by a better set of people who are supremely qualified, who are more honest, who had greater integrity, why would I assume that the very same experiment will succeed in the hands of lesser mortals? So I don't see the point in being neutral. I am not neutral. I clearly have a very defined position. I'd rather be honest about the position and support the position than put on the facade of neutrality like several journalists do. We don't live in the age of neutrality. We might as well wake up and smell the coffee.